The evening sun cast long shadows through the windows of Preston University's Arts Building as Maria Thompson began her usual cleaning routine. At 45 years old, she moved with an elegance that seemed out of place while pushing her cleaning cart down the empty hallways. Her dark hair was neatly tied back, and despite wearing the plain blue uniform of the university's janitorial staff, there was something special about the way she carried herself. Every evening at 6 p.m., Maria would start from the building's east wing, where the dance studios were located. She always saved these rooms for first, though few people knew why. As she worked, she hummed softly to herself. Tonight it was the familiar melody of Swan Lake, a tune that brought both joy and sadness to her heart. Maria's story wasn't what most people expected. 15 years ago, she had been Maria Thompson, principal dancer at the City Ballet Company. Her performances had earned standing ovations, and critics had praised her exceptional talent. But life had other plans. A car accident had left her with an injury that ended her dancing career, and with two young children to support, she had to find another way to make a living. Now, as she mopped the floors of Studio A, her favorite room because of its high ceiling and wall-length mirrors, she couldn't help but glance at her reflection. The mirrors had seen thousands of dancers over the years, but none quite like her. Sometimes, when she thought no one was watching, Maria would set down her mop and practice small movements, a turn here, a simple port de bras there, muscle memory from her years of training that refused to fade. "Good evening, Mrs. Martinez," a young student called out, interrupting Maria's thoughts. It was Jenny, one of the few dance students who actually noticed her. Most people looked right through her, as if the blue uniform made her invisible. "Good evening, Jenny," Maria replied with a warm smile. "And remember, it's Thompson, not Martinez." She was used to people making assumptions about her last name, but she always corrected them gently. Jenny blushed. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. I'll remember next time." She hurried off to her evening rehearsal, her dance bag bouncing against her hip. As Maria continued cleaning, she thought about her own children. Her daughter Sophie was now in college studying business, while her son Michael was finishing high school. They were the reason she worked two jobs, cleaning at the university in the evenings and giving private dance lessons to beginners on weekends. Every dollar went toward their education and future. The sound of classical music drifted from one of the practice rooms, and Maria's feet automatically moved in time with the familiar rhythm. Muscle memory was a powerful thing. Even after all these years, her body remembered every note of the classical repertoire. She had danced on stages across the country, performed for thousands, and now she cleaned the very floors where young dancers practiced their dreams. But Maria didn't feel sorry for herself. There was dignity in all work. Her mother had taught her that. Besides, being here, surrounded by dance, even as a cleaner, kept her connected to the art form she loved. She could watch the students practice, silently notice their mistakes, and sometimes, very rarely, offer a quiet suggestion when asked. As she worked her way through the studio, Maria's thoughts drifted to the upcoming student showcase. She had overheard the dance faculty discussing it during their meeting. Professor Sterling, the new department head, had been particularly vocal about maintaining the program's prestigious standards. Maria had noticed how he looked at her whenever their paths crossed, with that mixture of dismissal and disdain that she had grown unfortunately familiar with. The clock struck 7, and Maria knew she needed to pick up her pace. There were still 4 more studios to clean, plus the faculty offices and corridors. But before moving on, she allowed herself one small moment. Setting down her mop, she stood in first position, raised her arms in a perfect port de bras, and executed a simple turn. Her reflection in the mirror showed a glimpse of the dancer she used to be, still there, hidden beneath the uniform. A sudden noise in the hallway startled her back to reality. Maria quickly picked up her mop and resumed cleaning, but she couldn't hide the small smile on her face. They might see a janitor, but inside, she would always be a dancer. Little did she know that tomorrow would change everything. The day Professor Sterling would make the biggest mistake of his career by underestimating the woman in the blue uniform who cleaned his floors. The next evening started like any other at Preston University's Arts Building. Maria Thompson arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, her cleaning cart well stocked for another night of work. The dance studios were busy with students practicing for their upcoming showcase, and the sound of piano music filled the hallways. Professor Richard Sterling was working late in his office, something unusual for him. He was a tall man with gray hair and expensive suits who took pride in reminding everyone of his 20 years of experience in prestigious dance academies. As he walked down the hallway to get his coffee, he heard something that made him stop. Someone was humming Swan Lake's fourth act. Following the sound, he found Maria cleaning Studio C. She was lost in her own world, gracefully moving her mop while humming the complex melody perfectly. A few students were stretching at the bar, getting ready for their evening practice. Well, Professor Sterling said loudly, making Maria jump. I didn't know our cleaning staff was so musical. His voice dripped with sarcasm. The students stopped stretching and watched nervously. Maria straightened up and met his eyes. Good evening, Professor Sterling, she said calmly, continuing her work. That's quite a piece you're humming, he said, walking into the studio. Swan Lake, Act 4. I'm surprised you know it. He emphasized the words you in a way that made some students shift uncomfortably. Music is for everyone, Professor, Maria replied simply, trying to move past him with her cart. But Sterling wasn't finished. He stepped in front of her cart, blocking her path. Oh, indeed it is, he said with a mocking smile, and since you seem so knowledgeable about ballet, perhaps you'd like to show us some dance steps. The room fell silent. Even the piano music from next door seemed to fade away. More students had gathered at the doorway, drawn by the tension in the air. I need to finish my work, Professor, Maria said quietly, but Sterling didn't move. Oh, come now, he pressed, his voice getting louder. You clearly think you know something about ballet. Why else would you be humming one of the most challenging pieces in classical repertoire? Unless, he paused for effect, you're just pretending to know something you don't. Jenny, the student who had greeted Maria yesterday, stepped forward. Professor, that's not. Quiet, Sterling snapped. Then he turned back to Maria with a cold smile. I'll make you a deal. Show us some proper ballet, and I'll personally ensure you get an extra hour of pay. That's more than fair, isn't it? Unless you're afraid to show how little you actually know about dance. Maria looked around the studio. She saw the students' worried faces, Sterling's smug expression, and her own reflection in the mirror, still in her blue uniform, still holding her mop. She thought about her children, about her years of keeping quiet, about all the times she watched others make assumptions about her. Something shifted in her expression. She carefully set down her mop and straightened her uniform. Actually, Professor, she said, her voice steady, I would be happy to dance. Jenny, would you mind playing the Swan Lake variation, the one from Act 2? Jenny's eyes widened in surprise, but she nodded and hurried to the piano. The other students pressed closer to the doorway, some already pulling out their phones. Professor Sterling's smile widened. This was exactly what he'd wanted. A chance to humiliate the cleaning lady who dared to act like she knew something about his art. The floor is yours, he said with an exaggerated bow, gesturing to the center of the studio. Show us your talent. Maria walked to the center of the room, her steps measured and precise. She took a deep breath and nodded to Jenny at the piano. As the first notes filled the air, she closed her eyes for just a moment. When she opened them again, she wasn't Maria the janitor anymore. She was Maria Thompson, principal dancer, and she was about to teach Professor Sterling a lesson he would never forget. Time seemed to slow down in Studio C as Maria stood in the center of the room. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the evening sun cast long shadows through the windows. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, the curious students, Professor Sterling's mocking gaze, and Jenny's worried look from the piano. For a moment, doubt crept into her mind. It had been 15 years since she performed in front of an audience. Her work uniform wasn't made for dancing, and her comfortable black shoes were a far cry from the point shoes she once wore. But then she remembered something her old dance teacher had told her. True dance comes from the heart, not the costume. Maria took off her work shoes, leaving them neatly by her cleaning cart. The floor felt cool beneath her feet. She wore simple black socks, not ideal for dancing, but better than shoes for what she was about to do. From the doorway, she heard whispers and saw more phones being raised to record. Word had spread quickly through the arts building. Whenever you're ready, Professor Sterling said with fake politeness, checking his expensive watch. Though some of us do have actual work to return to. Maria ignored him and turned to Jenny. The tempo should be slightly slower than usual, she said quietly. Remember, it's a story of transformation. Jenny nodded, surprised by Maria's confident tone. Her fingers found the keys, and the first soft notes of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake filled the studio. Maria closed her eyes, letting the familiar melody wash over her. In her mind, she was back on stage, wearing white feathers instead of blue polyester. She began with simple port-de-bras, arm movements that told the story of a swan taking flight. Even these basic movements caught some students by surprise. Her arms were graceful, precise, showing years of training that no amateur could fake. Professor Sterling's smirk wavered slightly. Then came the first turn. Maria spun perfectly, her body remembering what to do even after all these years. The movement was clean, controlled, professional. A small gasp came from the crowd at the door. Even in socks and a janitor's uniform, there was no hiding the technique of a trained ballet dancer. As the music built, Maria moved into more complex sequences. Her kicks were high and precise, her jumps light and graceful. She performed a series of quick turns that would challenge even current professionals. The years of cleaning floors had kept her strong, and muscle memory took care of the rest. Professor Sterling's face changed from amusement to confusion, then to disbelief. He stepped back, bumping into a student's dance bag. The students at the door had gone completely silent, their phones steady as they recorded every moment. Jenny played beautifully, watching Maria with wide eyes as she followed the dancer's cues perfectly. The music swelled, and Maria began the most famous part of the variation, the sequence of 32 fouettes, continuous turning movements that only the most skilled dancers could complete. In her work uniform, with no special shoes or costume, Maria turned, and turned, and turned. Each rotation was precise, her spot unwavering, her technique flawless. The students started counting quietly. 5, 10, 15. By the 20th turn, Professor Sterling had sunk into a chair, his face pale. By the 30th, several dance teachers from other studios had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the music and the growing crowd. Maria completed all 32 turns perfectly, ending in a beautiful pose just as the music reached its peak. As Jenny played the final notes, Maria didn't strike a flashy pose. Instead, she returned to a simple first position, gave a small bow to the piano as dancers do to thank their accompanist, and walked calmly to her cleaning cart to put her shoes back on. The studio erupted in applause. Students were cheering, teachers were whispering urgently to each other, and phones were buzzing as videos were quickly shared. Professor Sterling sat frozen in his chair, his mouth slightly open, all his arrogance gone. Maria picked up her mop, her breathing only slightly faster than normal. "If you'll excuse me," she said quietly, "I have work to finish." She pushed her cart toward the door, parting the crowd of amazed onlookers. As she left Studio C, she allowed herself a small smile. She had done more than just dance. She had shown everyone that talent and dignity could be found in the most unexpected places. And this was only the beginning of the changes her performance would bring to Preston University. By midnight, the video of Maria's dance had spread like wildfire across social media. Jenny's recording, which captured the whole scene from Professor Sterling's cruel challenge to Maria's perfect performance, had already received thousands of views. Other students had posted their versions too, each showing different angles of the unexpected performance that had transformed a regular evening at Preston University. Maria knew nothing about her growing internet fame. She had finished her shift as usual, taking extra care to clean Studio C's floors after her impromptu performance. When she got home late that night, she made a simple dinner and checked on her sleeping children before going to bed, just like any other day. The next morning, Maria's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Her daughter Sophie called first, her voice excited and slightly out of breath. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? You're everywhere online," Sophie exclaimed. "My friends keep sharing the video. They can't believe that's my mom." Maria sat down at her small kitchen table, confused. "What video, honey?" "The one from last night. Someone titled it, 'Racist Professor Challenges Janitor to Dance. Instantly regrets it.' It's got over 100,000 views already." Before Maria could respond, her phone beeped with another call, then another. Former colleagues from her dancing days, local news stations, and even some of her weekend dance students were all trying to reach her. She turned off her phone, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. At Preston University that evening, Things were very different from normal. When Maria arrived with her cleaning cart, students stopped to applaud. Some asked for pictures, while others wanted to know where she had learned to dance. The halls were busier than usual, with people hoping to catch a glimpse of the ballet janitor, as social media had nicknamed her. Professor Sterling was notably absent. Sources said he had called in sick, but everyone knew he was hiding from the embarrassment. The video clearly showed his discriminatory behavior, and the university's administration couldn't ignore it anymore. The Dean of Fine Arts, Dr. Patricia Chen, requested a meeting with Maria in her office. Maria sat nervously in her blue uniform, hands folded in her lap, as Dr. Chen played the viral video on her computer. "Mrs. Thompson," Dr. Chen said, turning away from the screen, "why didn't you tell us about your background?" Maria straightened her back. "No one asked," she said simply. "I needed a job, and I'm not ashamed of being a janitor." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I did some research last night. You were Maria Thompson, principal dancer with the City Ballet Company. You performed all over the country. The accident that ended your career was while you were driving home from teaching underprivileged kids at a community center." "Yes," Maria replied quietly. "But that was a long time ago." "Not so long that you've lost your talent," Dr. Chen said, gesturing to the video. "The dance department has been flooded with calls. Former colleagues, dance critics, even some of your old students, they'd all remember you. And now our students are asking if you could teach them." Maria's eyes widened. "Teach? We'd like to offer you a position," Dr. Chen continued. "Part-time dance instructor to start. You could keep your current job if you want. Many of our adjunct faculty have other work, but your talent and experience shouldn't be wasted on just cleaning floors." Before Maria could respond, there was a knock at the door. A local news crew had arrived, wanting to interview the woman whose story had captured everyone's attention. Behind them, Maria could see more students gathering, phones ready to capture another moment of her journey. Dr. Chen smiled warmly. "Take your time to think about the offer, Mrs. Thompson. But remember, sometimes life gives us second chances in unexpected ways." Maria looked at her reflection in Dr. Chen's office window. She was still wearing her blue uniform, but she stood differently now. Her secret was out, and with it came an opportunity she never expected. Perhaps it was time to share her gift with a new generation of dancers, to turn a moment of humiliation into something positive. The news crew waited patiently as Maria considered how much her life had changed in just 24 hours. She had gone from being invisible to being in the spotlight again, but this time, she would do things on her own terms. The local news interview changed everything. Sitting in Dr. Chen's office, still in her janitor's uniform, Maria shared her story with a gentleness that touched everyone watching. She spoke about her dancing career, the accident, and her choice to put her children's education first. When asked about Professor Sterling's behavior, she showed remarkable grace. "I don't want anyone to lose their job," she told a reporter. "What I want is for people to understand that dignity isn't about what uniform you wear or what job you do. It's about how you treat others." The interview went viral even faster than the original dance video. Within days, major news networks picked up the story. The ballet janitor became a symbol of resilience and hidden talent. But for Maria, the most important changes were happening right at Preston University. Word spread through the dance community that Maria Thompson, the once celebrated ballerina, was back. Former colleagues reached out, sharing stories about her performances and her dedication to teaching underprivileged students before her accident. Dance magazines dug up old reviews and photos of her performing the very same Swan Lake variation, but in a pristine white tutu instead of a blue uniform. The university's board of directors called an emergency meeting to address the situation. Professor Sterling's behavior had brought unwanted attention to the school, and the viral videos showed clear discrimination. While they met behind closed doors, Maria continued her normal routine, both cleaning the halls and now, unexpectedly, helping students with their technique. Mrs. Thompson, a young dancer named Lisa, called out one evening, "Could you show me how you spot during turns? I keep getting dizzy." Maria set down her mop and walked over. Other students gathered around, phones temporarily forgotten as they watched her demonstrate proper technique. Even in her work clothes, her movement quality was unmistakable. "The secret," she explained, showing them slowly, is to keep your eyes focused on one point as long as possible, then whip your head around quickly to find it again. She demonstrated a perfect turn, making it look effortless. The students practiced, wobbling and laughing, as Maria gave gentle corrections. Dr. Chen watched from the doorway, smiling. This was exactly why she had offered Maria the teaching position. The students were learning not just technique, but also humility and respect. A week after the incident, the board reached their decision. Professor Sterling would be placed on administrative leave, pending a full investigation of his behavior patterns. More importantly, they approved a new position. Maria would become a part-time dance instructor while maintaining her janitorial role, her choice, as she insisted on finishing what she started. The dance department was transformed. Students who had once walked past Maria without a glance now sought her advice. They learned that she had danced with some of the most prestigious companies in the country, that she had performed in Paris and London, and that she had once run a free dance program for underprivileged children. "But why didn't you tell anyone?" Jenny asked one day as Maria helped her with a difficult sequence. Maria smiled, adjusting Jenny's arm position. "Sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from unexpected places. I learned that having a fancy title doesn't make you a better person, and wearing a uniform doesn't make you less worthy of respect." The story caught the attention of a local arts foundation. They approached Maria with an idea. Would she be interested in starting a scholarship program for talented dancers who couldn't afford traditional training? The foundation would provide funding if Maria would serve as the program director. Standing in Studio C, where it all began, Maria looked at her reflection in the mirror. She saw both versions of herself now: the dedicated janitor in her blue uniform and the graceful dancer who had never really left. Both were equally important parts of who she was. Dr. Chen knocked on the studio door, holding some papers. "The foundation sent over the scholarship program proposal," she said. "They want to name it after you, the Maria Thompson Dance Initiative for Inclusive Arts." Maria felt tears in her eyes. What had started as an attempt to humiliate her had turned into an opportunity to make real change. She thought about all the talented young dancers who might never get a chance without help, just like she might never have had her chance if someone hadn't believed in her years ago. "When do we start?" she asked, ready to begin this new chapter of her journey. 2 months after the viral video incident, Studio C had become a very different place. The room where Professor Sterling had once tried to humiliate Maria was now filled with excited voices and determined young dancers. It was Saturday morning, and Maria was teaching her first official class for the scholarship program. 20 students from diverse backgrounds filled the studio. Some wore proper dance clothes, while others practiced in simple t-shirts and leggings. Maria had personally selected each one based on talent and passion rather than their ability to pay for classes. She still wore her blue janitor's uniform while teaching, a choice that confused some people but made perfect sense to her students. "Remember," Maria said, demonstrating a basic position, "ballet isn't about expensive clothes or fancy studios. It's about discipline, dedication, and the story you tell through your movements." Among her students was Teresa, a gifted 14-year-old who cleaned offices with her mother after school. Maria saw herself in the girl's determined eyes. Another student, Marcus, worked at a fast food restaurant to help his single father. Despite their different backgrounds, they all shared the same dream: to dance. The local news had come back to film a follow-up story. They captured Maria moving gracefully between students, making small corrections with the expertise of a seasoned teacher. The camera focused on a wall where old photographs now hung, pictures of Maria in her prime, performing on stages around the world, along with newspaper clippings about her community work before the accident. During the class break, a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was Professor Sterling, looking very different from the arrogant man who had mocked Maria 2 months ago. His administrative leave had ended, but the investigation had led to him being demoted from department head. The board had required him to undergo extensive sensitivity training, and his experience had become a case study in workplace discrimination. The room fell silent as he walked in. Maria turned to face him, standing tall in her uniform. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice quiet and uncertain, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Maria nodded and followed him into the hallway. The students crowded near the door, protective of their teacher, while the news crew filmed from a distance. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Sterling began, looking at the floor. My behavior, it was unforgivable. I let my prejudices blind me, and in doing so, I nearly deprived our students of an incredible teacher. Maria listened silently as he continued. I've watched you teach these past few weeks, he said. You have a gift not just for dance, but for bringing out the best in your students. I was wrong about everything, and I'm deeply sorry. Maria studied his face, seeing genuine remorse. Thank you for the apology, Professor Sterling, she said calmly. But it's not just me who deserves it. Every person who cleans these halls, serves food in the cafeteria, or maintains these grounds deserves the same respect you give to faculty members. Sterling nodded, understanding filling his eyes. Would you? Would you be willing to let me help with the scholarship program? I have connections with several dance companies that might be interested in supporting your students. A small smile appeared on Maria's face. Everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow, Professor Sterling, even teachers themselves. When they returned to the studio, Maria's students were practicing their positions. The news crew had captured the entire conversation, but Maria knew this wasn't just another viral moment. This was real change happening, one person at a time. All right, everyone, she called out, picking up her teaching stick. Let's work on the variation from Don Quixote. Professor Sterling has offered to help with partnering techniques. The students looked surprised, but Maria's warm smile reassured them. As classical music filled the studio once again, Maria watched her students dance. The janitor's daughter, the fast food worker, the professor learning humility, all moving to the same beautiful music. Her phone buzzed with a message from the Arts Foundation. 3 more universities had reached out, wanting to start similar scholarship programs. Maria's story was inspiring change far beyond Preston University's walls. As she watched her students practice, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from proving others wrong, but from showing them a better way forward. 6 months had passed since Maria's viral video moment, and Preston University's dance program had undergone a complete transformation. The Maria Thompson Dance Initiative had grown beyond anyone's expectations, spreading to 5 other universities across the state. But today was special. It was the evening of the first scholarship showcase. The university's main theater was packed. Local news stations set up their cameras, and representatives from major dance companies filled the front rows. Maria stood backstage, still in her blue uniform, helping her students with last-minute preparations. I'm scared, Mrs. Thompson, Teresa whispered, peeking through the curtain at the crowd. She had been chosen to perform the same Swan Lake variation that had changed everything that night in Studio C. Maria adjusted Teresa's costume, a simple but elegant dress donated by a local dance shop. Remember what I taught you, she said softly. Dance your truth. The audience will feel it. In the wings, Professor Sterling was helping Marcus with his tie. The former department head had become one of the program's strongest supporters, using his connections to secure opportunities for the scholarship students. Tonight, he would introduce Maria to the audience. His idea of publicly acknowledging both his past mistakes and her incredible impact. The house lights dimmed, and Professor Sterling walked onto the stage. The audience fell silent. 6 months ago, he began, his voice carrying through the theater, I made a terrible mistake. My prejudice and arrogance led me to mock someone I saw only as a janitor. That moment, captured on video and seen by millions, could have ended my career. Instead, it began a journey of transformation. Not just for me, but for our entire university. He gestured toward the wings, and Maria walked onto the stage. The audience burst into applause, many rising to their feet. She still wore her work uniform, but now it was a symbol of pride rather than shame. Maria Thompson was once a celebrated principal dancer, Sterling continued. But her greatest performance wasn't on any grand stage. It was in showing us that dignity, talent, and grace can exist in any uniform, any job, any person. Tonight, our students will show you what happens when we look past our prejudices and give talent a chance to shine. The showcase began with Teresa's performance. As she danced the Swan Lake variation, Maria watched from backstage, tears in her eyes. Teresa's technique wasn't perfect, but her passion and determination shone through every movement. The audience sat mesmerized, watching the young girl tell her own story through dance. Marcus performed next, in a contemporary piece he had choreographed himself about his journey from fast food worker to dancer. Other students followed, each bringing their unique backgrounds and experiences to their performances. A custodian's son, a grocery store clerk, a car wash attendant's daughter, each one demonstrating that art belongs to everyone. During intermission, Maria's phone buzzed with exciting news. The State Arts Council had voted to fund similar programs in 20 more schools. Her small act of courage in Studio C had sparked a movement for inclusive arts education. The evening's final performance was a surprise. The scholarship students had prepared a special piece, combining classical ballet with contemporary dance, telling the story of a janitor who changed their lives. As Maria watched from the wings, Professor Sterling approached her with a small box. "The students wanted you to wear this for the curtain call," he said, opening it to reveal a simple silver pin in the shape of a ballet shoe. Maria touched the pin gently. "It's beautiful, but..." She looked down at her uniform. "They want you to pin it right here," Sterling said, pointing to her uniform's collar. "They say it represents how you taught them to be proud of who they are, no matter what they wear." The showcase ended with a standing ovation as Maria took her final bow alongside her students, wearing her uniform proudly with the silver pin gleaming at her collar. She saw her own children in the audience. Sophie was filming everything on her phone, while Michael held up a handmade sign, "My mom," teaching more than just dance. Backstage, after the applause had died down, a representative from the National Arts Foundation approached Maria. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, "we'd like to discuss taking your program nationwide. Your story has inspired people across the country to rethink access to arts education." Maria looked around at her students, still buzzing with excitement from their performances. What had started as one cruel moment had grown into something that would change countless lives. Sometimes, she realized, the most powerful changes begin in the most unexpected places. 1 year had passed since the night Professor Sterling had challenged Maria to dance in Studio C. The video that captured that moment had reached over 10 million views, but its real impact couldn't be measured in clicks and shares. On this special evening, Maria stood in the same studio, but everything was different. The Maria Thompson Dance Initiative had spread to over 50 universities across the country. More than 500 students from working-class backgrounds were now receiving dance education through the program. But Maria hadn't forgotten where it all started. She still cleaned the halls of Preston University every evening before teaching her classes. Tonight was the anniversary celebration, and Studio C was filled with people who had been part of the journey. Teresa, her first scholarship student, was now preparing for an audition with a major dance company. Marcus had received a full dance scholarship to college. Jenny, who had played the piano that fateful night, was helping teach music to new scholarship students. The local news crew that had covered the original story was back, but this time they were filming a national documentary about the program's success. They interviewed students whose lives had been changed, teachers who had learned valuable lessons about prejudice, and janitors who were now treated with new respect throughout the campus. Professor Sterling, wearing a casual sweater instead of his once signature expensive suits, stood near the piano. He had become a different person over the past year, using his experience to speak at educational conferences about overcoming bias in academia. He was now one of the program's biggest advocates, personally mentoring several scholarship students. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, addressing the crowded studio, "a year ago, I stood in this room and made the worst mistake of my career. But you turned that moment of cruelty into a movement of change. Today, we're not just celebrating a viral video or a scholarship program. We're celebrating a transformation in how we see each other." Maria, still in her blue uniform with the silver ballet shoe pin, smiled as she looked around the studio. The walls were now covered with photos, not just of her past performances, but of her scholarship students performing, practicing, and achieving their dreams. Among them was a framed screenshot of the original viral video, a reminder of where it all began. Dr. Chen stepped forward with an announcement. "The board of directors has unanimously voted to rename Studio C," she said. "From today, this will be the Maria Thompson Studio for Inclusive Arts. And there's more. The National Arts Foundation has pledged $10 million to expand the program nationwide." Applause filled the room, but Maria raised her hand for quiet. "Thank you," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But this studio shouldn't be named after just me. Every person who cleans these floors, every student who dares to dream, every teacher who learns to look past appearances, they're all part of this story." She walked to her cleaning cart, which still stood in the corner of the studio. "This uniform," she said, touching its blue fabric, "taught me that dignity isn't about what you wear or what job you do. It's about how you treat others and how you stay true to yourself." The celebration continued with performances by current and former scholarship students. As Maria watched them dance, she remembered her own journey from principal dancer to janitor to something entirely new, a symbol of change and hope. Her children, Sophie and Michael, now in college themselves, had helped create a foundation to manage the growing program. The cruel video that was meant to mock their mother had instead launched a movement that would help thousands of talented young people pursue their dreams. As the evening drew to a close, a small girl approached Maria. She was the daughter of the university's new cafeteria worker, clutching a worn ballet shoe. "Mrs. Thompson," she said shyly, "I want to learn to dance like you." Maria knelt down beside her, straightening her uniform as she did. "You'll learn to dance like yourself," she said warmly. "That's the most beautiful dance of all." Looking around the studio one last time, Maria saw not just the end of a remarkable year, but the beginning of a lasting legacy. The story that began with an act of discrimination had transformed into a testament to human dignity, talent, and the power of second chances. And somewhere, in another studio, another person in a uniform might be hiding their own remarkable talent, just waiting for the chance to shine.